What springs to mind when you think of the Thames riverfront? These days, it's most likely to be luxury flats. Indeed, luxury flats even appear beside the iconic power station, but it wasn't always so. So what was there before the desirable residences? Riverfront history Battersea goes back to when Battersea was rural and agricultural, then industrial, crossed by railway lines and fully urbanised. From the 1700s towards the present day, we will move upstream from Lambeth and Vauxhall through Battersea. Other episodes will show Wandsworth, Putney, and on the opposite bank, Chelsea. Battersea is one of the oldest recorded place names in London. A 7th century Anglo-Saxon charter refers to Badrige's Ege, the island of a man called Badrick. The area around the original village stands on gravel rather than the marshy fields along the river. Possibly the oldest artefact in London, the Battersea Shield, was found near Chelsea Bridge. It may date from 54 BC, during Julius Caesar's second invasion, nearly a century before the Roman conquest and the founding of the City of London. Battersea's oldest existing landmark is the parish church of St Mary. A papal bull of 1157 refers to a church at Battersea. This print from 1760 shows St Mary's shortly before it was rebuilt. Most of the present structure dates from its rebuilding in 1775-6, but the slipway on the riverfront has been there since the Middle Ages. An older window of 1631 was preserved and reinstalled in the new building. The White Hart, next door near Lombard Road, was first mentioned in 1757. By the late 1700s, the area was mainly agricultural, with a few houses which were the desirable residences of that day. All along the Surrey side of the Thames, there was a belt of fertile marshlands. These became market gardens and were known as common fields. Nightmen collected excrement from cesspits in town after dark. This was brought by boat. Then it was used to dung the soil. The boats that brought the manure took the gardener's produce back into town to be sold at Covent Garden. There was even a dunghill square marked on the 1746 map of the area. It was near what is now the junction of Plough Road and St John's Hill. The marshy common fields were well known for their vegetables and melons. They also produced two crops which were identified with the area: asparagus and lavender. Asparagus, or sparrowgrass, was sold as Battersea bundles. Lavender Hill was named after the lavender grown there. A ferry crossed the river at the present location of Battersea Bridge. The road to the crossing place was recorded as Ferry Lane in 1598. The ferry was replaced by the first bridge in 1772. This would have made it easier for the market gardeners to get their produce to Covent Garden. Some views of the area showed windmills and fields, but since 1780 the riverfront was becoming increasingly built up. Factories and wharves spread upstream from Lambeth. These even included gasworks. The gasworks at Nine Elms were right by the site of the power station which would follow a century later. They included an iconic blue gas holder built in 1832, which stood for 80 years. In 1816, steamboats began taking passengers on river cruises. A printer called Samuel Lee obviously enjoyed these excursions. In 1829, he published a panorama of the Thames. It was a series of prints of his own sketches in a fold-out book. They were hand-coloured in watercolours. Lee shows the spreading industry but doesn't show the gasworks at Nine Elms. He identified a chemical factory, an iron foundry, and Brunel's sawmills. Built by the father of Isambard Kingdom Brunel, they featured steam-powered machinery to make veneers for furniture. Lee shows the rebuilt version after they burnt down in 1814. In 1792, a curious mill began to operate in Battersea, known as the horizontal mill. Instead of sails, it had floats or vanes, which were turned by wind coming in through louvres. It was used to grind linseed, and was even painted by John Constable. Several of the distilleries along the river had herds of pigs, which were fed from leftover grain. One of them was near the site of York House, a property once owned by the Archbishop of York. Lee also identifies a silk factory a little further upstream. The first passenger steam service was the London and Southampton Railway, later London and South Western. It came through in 1838. At first, the London and South Western's terminus was at Nine Elms. After Waterloo opened in 1848, as Waterloo Bridge, Nine Elms became a goods station and a depot where the London and South Western Railway built its own locomotives. The development of the railways after 1840 transformed the area, with the population increasing from 6,600 in 1841 to 169,000 by 1901. At first, the area was built up to meet the demand for small houses for workers. Here are examples from local streets which survived into the 1950s. Many small houses of this period were so poorly built that they gave rise to the expression jerry building. A report on conditions in Battersea stated, "Jerry building has not been unknown." Despite the spreading urbanization of the common fields, Battersea Park was for the benefit of the local community. It opened in 1858, the result of a campaign led by a local vicar and the builder of Belgravia, Thomas Cubitt. His yards were across the river in the still marshy and undeveloped area of Pimlico. The site of the park was 320 acres of fertile marshland alongside Chelsea Reach. It became an Arcadia of cricket pitches, bandstands and boating lakes. In the 1890s it became popular with cyclists who were banned from the royal parks. In 1951 the park was incorporated into the Festival of Britain as Festival Gardens. The attractions included a fun fair with the roller coaster known as the Big Dipper. It was closed after a lethal accident in 1972. 1863 was a landmark year. Not only did both Clapham Junction and Battersea stations open for passengers, but also the Cremorne or Battersea Railway Bridge. It was one of the earliest railway bridges across the river, and is a listed Grade II structure. Its fancy name came from the Cremorne Pleasure Gardens, which were then nearby. Yes, there actually was a Battersea station or junction. It was on an elevated level beside Battersea High Street, but was bombed in 1940 and never reopened. It was on an extension of the West London Railway. The West London Railway was created to connect railways coming into town from both north and south. Its West London extension continues south through Battersea to Clapham Junction. Clapham Junction was shared by no less than 3 different companies: the London and South Western Railway, the London Brighton and South Coast Railway, and the West London Extension Railway. Bradshaw's railway timetable admitted, in an apologetic footnote, that Clapham was actually a mile and a half away. To be fair, the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway's map shows 2 other Battersea stations, as well as Battersea itself. The opening of Clapham Junction transformed the surrounding area into a more middle-class suburb. Speculative or spec builders immediately took advantage of the opportunity to build medium-sized houses on roads near the station. The growing middle class, such as city clerks, moved into them. Back to the riverfront. Morgan's Crucible Works was another prominent riverside industry. From 1856 onwards, it lay between Battersea Bridge and St Mary's. It made graphite or plumbago crucibles. These were pots used for melting metal before it was moulded into shapes such as coins. Known as the Plum, it became the biggest employer in the area. Price's candles arrived in 1843. Their premises were marked on Ordnance Survey maps as Belmont Works. Their candles were made from palm and coconut oil rather than beeswax or tallow. The process had byproducts which could be made into soap, lamp oil, and later benzene and kerosene. Production reached its height circa 1877. As electric light became widespread, the oil and domestic products kept the business profitable enough to attract the attention of Lever Brothers, who took over in 1919. Their buildings had characteristic curved roofs. Battersea Creek was where a local river, the Falcon or Hydeborne, entered the Thames, having flowed down or under Northcote and Falcon roads. The Falcon divided into two branches. These branches made Battersea an island. The Falcon still reaches the Thames through a landscaped pond. Battersea Creek had wharves where goods were loaded onto barges for further transport by water. The riverfront wharves have become Clove Hitch Quay. An aerial photo from 1928 shows barges moored up to 5 deep. A monument to the riverfront's industrial heritage still stands in the river. It is a wooden docking platform which still has wooden dolphins at either end. To allow barges to rise and fall with the tide, they were moored by long lines attached to the dolphins, not to the platform or the wharf. In 1820, the site of York House Distillery became a wool cloth factory lit by gas. It was taken over by a ribbon manufacturer in 1826. On Lee's panorama, it was identified as a silk factory. Eventually, Garton Saccharum arrived from Southampton in 1882. The site became Southampton Wharf. Barges brought maize for sugar refining. Saccharum was a syrup used for brewing beer. Garton was responsible for an unpleasant local phenomenon known as the Battersea smell. It was an unpleasant cloying stench made when leftover fibre was heated to make cattle feed. Locals called Gartons whiffins, but Price's was also blamed for the smell. Upstream from Garton's, a starch factory was set up in 1848. The starch was used in laundering. It was taken by barge to the docks downstream. Engineers took over that site until part of it became a home-base store. Further development brought luxury flats, high-rise buildings, and floating piers for houseboats and other craft. On the site of the present Battersea Reach development, there was yet another distillery. There was a distillery on the site until it became a lorry park in the 1980s, before the luxury flats were built. Part of that development is named Juniper Drive. Riverfront history continues upstream with Riverfront History Wandsworth.